welcome everyone to this session of the National Jewish Assembly, where we're having a debate on the Holocaust Memorial, which is proposed to be situated in Victoria Tower Gardens near Parliament Square. I'm very grateful that so many of you have attended today, and it's your opportunity to speak for up to 3 minutes on this subject. It's not a question of whether you may be for, you may be against, you may be uncertain. You don't have to declare whether you're for or against before we start. Can I just say also that we are, I think, the first major Jewish organisation to have any formal debate on this subject. It is, I regard it very much as a debate among friends, because every one of us wants the best for Holocaust education and remembrance. We simply differ according to how we think that can best be achieved. The format then, just to say, is everyone can speak for up to 3 minutes. We have a clock, which you should be able to see on your screen in the top left-hand corner. But first thing we're going to do before we start speaking is we're going to have a poll. So, Joel, are you able to organise the poll? What we're having is a poll before, and we'll take a poll again at the end of the afternoon to see who's made up their minds, who's changed their minds. I'm sure there's quite a number of people who haven't made up their minds. So, Joel, are you able to launch the poll now? Joel? I'm not sure.
So just 1 second, it'll be up in 1 moment.
Okay, thank you, Joel. So this is your initial vote, and you may change your mind. You're completely free to change your mind during the course of the afternoon, and then we'll ask you to vote again. It just gives us an indication of what people are thinking to start with. And as I say, you can give 3 possible votes: for, against, or undecided. And the poll will come up shortly. While we're waiting for the poll, I would just also remind everybody that you are responsible for what you say. You mustn't say anything slanderous. If you do, the National Jewish Assembly will not be held liable. So please keep your points to the issues and don't slander any particular individual. It's very important. I'm sure none of you will do that, but it's just, I think, important. I just remind you. Okay, so we're just now waiting for the poll to come up. How are we doing, Joel?
Just a few seconds away.
Good. Hooray, we have a poll. So you can vote yes, no, or undecided to the question: should a Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre be built in Victoria Tower Gardens? Okay. Just another 10 seconds for people to vote. Okay, right. So we have 12 in favour, 48 against, and 17 undecided. So let's just make a note of those numbers there, and it'd be interesting to see how those numbers change as we go through the afternoon. So thank you, Joel, very much for doing that. Now let's move on to the first speaker, James Marlowe, who is the political advisor to the National Jewish Assembly, will speak first. Then I'm going to call on the following, and the order in which I've seen their hands: Lawrence Julius, Jeffrey Alderman, and Irene Lancaster, in that order. So James, would you like to go first? Your clock starts now, 3 minutes. And can we unmute James, please? Are you able to unmute yourself, James? Yes, well done. Can I just check the clock before James, you start? Can I check the clock is working, Joel? Joel is, yes, great. Off you go, James.
Good afternoon. We can all agree today that Holocaust education is a must. It's essential. And all of us have to do everything within our power to help encourage and promote it. But nevertheless, there are two clear trains of thoughts on this subject. Number one, of course, is that there are those who believe that a large building where approximately 125 million pounds should be invested in a building across the street from the Palace of Westminster, despite the local opposition to that. The other side, of course, believes that instead of perhaps putting all that money into a building opposite the Houses of Parliament, perhaps maybe it might be better used if we actually put the building in another place in the southeast of the UK, or maybe somewhere else in the country itself. Perhaps it could be used in terms of flying people out to Auschwitz, making all sort of technical recordings. For example, something that Gary and I saw just a few weeks ago at an evening that we were present at, whereby that a school child can actually just type in about a Holocaust and actually get a real live time, even though he or she may have passed away by this time, actually answering his or her questions. Quite unique, unbelievable. A great deal of money needs to go into something like this. These are clearly the two schools of thought. I don't know where it is that I stand on this. I'm actually open for debate, and I'd like to hear what other people have to say on this. But I do understand both sides very much. And I think it's important that we actually focus on the objective as opposed to sticking a building there or not going with that building because another side believes that the building is essential. The focus, the objective, the actual vision has got to be Holocaust education, whether that is in the form of a building or whether that's in the form of actually educating the kids today and of the next generation. That has to be what it is that we focus on. And if I can just end by saying that I know that there is a concern that this building, if it does go up opposite the Palace of Westminster, there is a concern that perhaps Holocaust education may be watered down. In other words, dreadful and horrible as they were, Cambodia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Rwanda, those terrible, terrible destructions of people, but it cannot be compared on the same scale as 6 million Jews during the 1940s. So therefore, I throw it all back to you. We're all friends, as Gary said, and let's have a respectful debate and let's see what the result is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Lawrence Julius. You should be able to unmute.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to say I didn't speak to James in advance. I didn't know what he was going to say. I mean, I believe that Holocaust education is critical. Personally, I would like to see a single world-class centre of excellence concentrating all the resources and educational facilities at a single location. We have half of one already at the Imperial War Museum, and to me, that would make a lot of sense as a location like that. I also feel the memorial needs to be uniquely to the Holocaust because it was unique in its size, its scope, and as an industrialized process. So almost, James says, I'm saying virtually the same thing as James, and that's my views. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lawrence. I'm now going to ask Jeffrey Alderman to speak next. After Jeffrey, Irene Lancaster, Jeff Rowland, and Jonathan Lass, in that order. Jeffrey. Could you unmute, please, Jeffrey? You're still on mute. Not quite sure what the matter is. Here we go, Jeffrey.
Yes, right. Chair, thank you very much. I wish to address two issues primarily. The first is whether a Holocaust memorial should be built in Victoria Tower Gardens. And the answer to this is that I can think of few sites less appropriate for the proposed edifice than Victoria Tower Gardens, which is a small public park within a conservation area, already designated as a zone of monument saturation. The gardens are also home to a small children's playground, and unsurprisingly, amongst the objectors to the proposal are the official advisor to UNESCO on World Heritage Sites, the Royal Parks, and even the Environment Agency, which incidentally, Chair, has pointed out that the building of the memorial within Victoria Tower Gardens could adversely affect flood defences on which local businesses and homes rely. Official drawings show that the memorial will take up no less than 26.9% of the green space currently in the park. It is little wonder, Chair, that local residents are up in arms. Secondly, do we need another Holocaust memorial? And here I must remind participants that there are a number of imposing Holocaust memorials already. Frank Meisler's moving kinder transport sculpture at Liverpool Street Station, the memorial in Highbridge, Somerset, to the British secret agent Frank Foley, through whose efforts more than 10,000 Jews were able to escape from Nazi Germany. There's already a Holocaust memorial in London's Hyde Park. There's a permanent Holocaust exhibition within the Imperial War Museum. And in London's Russell Square, there's the world-class Wiener Library for the study of the Holocaust and genocide. And I do feel bound to ask, Chair, what justification there can possibly be for the erection of yet another Holocaust memorial and learning centre crowding the nation's capital. And finally, Chair, I must draw attention to the cost. £125 million is a figure that's been floated in front of me. It's eye-watering. In this day and age, in these circumstances, all of us participating in this debate this afternoon can think of causes much more worthy of investing £125 million than yet another Holocaust memorial. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. The next speaker is Irene Lancaster. Can you unmute, Irene? Good. Off you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. The aims of your new organisation are promoting Jewish life, supporting Israel, and fighting anti-Semitism. With these issues in mind, I would like to agree with the former speakers and tell you why I don't agree. 20 minutes before this meeting started, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, rang me and said that if he could have come today, but unfortunately he's at church, he would have liked to have voted against this proposal and has asked me to say that to you. The same with Father Philip, the area dean of Westminster, a great guy who has been very helpful in the cause, and also members of my Broughton Park Dialogue group, Jews and Christians, and our conversation group. I've been involved in this issue since 2014 when the civil servant came to see me. It was quite obvious to me then that this wasn't being done for the Jewish community, this was being done for various members of the government and also secretaries of state. I didn't say anything and I was very nice to her and gave her 2 meals. Later, I was invited to be part of the jury to choose the design that was not just in London, but also in Manchester and in Scotland and in Ireland. So in Manchester, I went along to the town hall and we asked more than once of the then Prime Minister's assistant, speechwriter apparently, 3 questions. Do the Buxtons agree with this? Does Westminster Council agree with this? And does the local resident community agree? We were told yes in all cases, but as it happens, there had already been demonstrations and the chairman, whose name we were given, of the whole enterprise had resigned earlier than our meeting. Obviously at the time, we were not aware of that. We were told at all times that the design that we chose should blend with the Buxton Memorial, and we chose a design that wasn't as beautiful, but it would not have been over the top. And we were told also that this was not just to do with Holocaust Memorial commemoration, but also to do with celebrating the Jewish community of this country and all it has done. We then received, some years later, a letter from the Chief Rabbi Mervis's office encouraging us very strongly to vote in favour of the proposal to Westminster Council, and they cast aspersions on that council. I'm not going to say in public what they said. And that's when I got very worried, because I knew that we'd been told that Westminster Council agreed. Then the planning inquiry at the council, as you know, overrode the whole thing. And but in January 2020, the present King Charles, our monarch, as Prince of Wales, went to Yad Vashem, and I actually viewed this from Israel. The whole thing was the meeting of the 75th anniversary since the end of the war, and everybody from all over the world that was important.
I'm sorry, Irene, your 3 minutes is up. I'm very, very sorry. If we have time at the end, I'll give people a second chance. We see if not enough people wish to speak. Right, now, next speaker is Jeff Rowland. After Jeff, I'm going to call Jonathan Lass, then Baroness Ruth Deitch, Arthur Kremenstein, and Paul Hart in that order. Jeff, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I agree with the previous speakers. I think it's inexplicable that this location was chosen for this project. I think there are so many things wrong with it that it's going to cause massive anti-Semitism rather than reduce anti-Semitism. It involves the destruction of a nice, quiet, open space. It's going to obstruct the view of Parliament. I think the structure that's proposed there is an unpleasant, brutalist sort of modern building. There'll be damage to trees, possibly. It's going to totally overshadow the attractive, low-key anti-slavery monument next to it. And I think this is going to advance rather than reduce the anti-Semites' view that the Jewish lobby is all powerful and that we do control, I mean the alleged Jewish lobby is all powerful and and really does control the media and the government. I think the legislation of 1900 to maintain the character of the park is there for a purpose, and it would be disgraceful to enact legislation to get rid of that. The new Prime Minister has said previously, undoubtedly with the best of motives, that he supports the project, but I wonder if perhaps he wasn't aware of the degree of opposition to it. And I would hope that he would perhaps go back to revisit it and take opposing views into account. Finally, I'd like to thank Baroness Deitch for all the hard work she's done opposing this project. And I don't think she's here today, but Melanie Phillips as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Our next speaker is Jonathan Lass. Then there'll be Baroness Ruth Deitch, then Arthur Kremenstein, then Paul Hart, and then Jonathan Taylor. Can I encourage those who haven't put their hands up to do so? I can see 14 more people wanting to speak, but feel free to speak, and also feel free to speak in favour. I think the speeches we've had so far, some have been undecided and some have been against, but I'd like to hear someone speak in favour as well. That would be good. Jonathan. Jonathan, you need to unmute. Oh,
yes, no, I was trying to. I wasn't able to do that. Hello, everybody, and can I just thank the National Jewish Assembly and your chairman, Gary Mon, for hosting this. It's very timely. I think it is common ground that the existing memorial in Hyde Park may not be adequate. It's not sufficiently visible. It is true, and we've heard from a number of speakers already, that the proposal for the memorial did not have wide public consultation, and it certainly didn't have it within the Jewish community. We've also heard that it's been opposed by numerous civic and public bodies, the Council, Parks, Historic England, UNESCO, and so forth. We've also heard that it could seriously damage our flood defences. The architectural impact is materially inadequate, and the subterranean complex is huge, and we lose almost a third of the Grade 2 listed gardens. It also would represent a material security risk, as featured by Alex Carlyle. It could be a target for extremists. And the visitor numbers, they estimate between 1 million people, would already crowd the Palace of Westminster and Westminster Abbey. The real issue is one of duplication and cost. The IWM, the Imperial War Museum, has brand new Holocaust galleries, which opened this time last year, 30,000 square foot, 1,500 artifacts, digital learning center with an expert team of curators reaching young people, universities and museums around the world and the community at large. And it focuses on genocide, both historic and contemporary. It attracts 1.3 million visitors and it's less than 1 mile from Victoria Palace Gardens. The cost we've heard now has gone up. I had 100 million, so it's gone up by 25, of which 75 is coming from the public purse. The balance was supposed to come from private sources, but I don't think it's actually been raised. And therefore, the solution to this would be the following. There should be a competition for a modest-sized memorial, albeit possibly in the gardens. But this would be of a size to detract from the gardens. And on that memorial would be a direction to the Imperial War Museum and their Holocaust galleries, designed by Norman Foster, showing them where they could go to see in depth the facilities that are there for education and so forth. The current proposal is flawed. It's inappropriate in the current economic environment, and we need to celebrate what's been done at the Imperial War Museum for the benefit of the community in terms of educating successive generations as to the horrors of the Holocaust and building on that together with the Wiener libraries we've already heard for successive generations.
3. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Baroness Deitch, Ruth Deitch, would you please unmute? I think you're going great. And then, yes, okay, Ruth Deitch.
I have led this opposition with a heavy heart, and I've done it for the sake of my grandparents who died, and I cannot allow their terrible deaths to be used for this political project. I want to thank you for having this debate, because the Board of Deputies has refused and the supporters have absolutely refused to discuss this with the objectors. Now, 2 things got me going. There are more than 300 Holocaust memorials around the world. More are being built as we speak. Yet anti-Semitism has reached the highest levels known to many of us for decades. I sometimes wonder whether the Holocaust memorial supporters, even educators, aren't operating in a different parallel universe. And I know that hardly any research has been carried out into whether visitors to these memorials are affected by what they've seen and alter their opinion about Jewish matters. Others will speak about the environment situation. You should know, however, that the design is secondhand. It was entered for a competition in Ottawa, did not win, and was trundled out for a very different scenario in London. The 23 fins are historically inaccurate. Sir Richard Evans has said this is not an accurate number of Jewish communities and any that were destroyed. Anyway, it doesn't mean anything to anybody. I want really to speak about the contents of the Learning Centre underground and its theme. This is what got me going when I saw a few years ago Jeremy Corbyn in the front row of a National Holocaust Remembrance meeting and then signing the Remembrance book with a smile for the photographer in the Houses of Parliament. And I began to be concerned about what message was being conveyed. Politicians can easily pay homage to 6 million who died, present themselves as non-racist, and then go on to criticize Israel, where another 6 million Jews live who happen to be under existential threat. As Jonathan Sachs said, modern anti-Semitism focuses on Israel. The Westminster Project, it's neither a memorial nor is it about the Holocaust. It's designed to present a view of the Second World War as a struggle between Western civilization and Nazism. The Shoah will be put in with other genocides as part of that narrative, as if they were all the same. The supporters have said that it is to be a monument to British values. Visitors will come out, see Parliament and think that couldn't happen here. It won't mention Israel or why the Nazis wanted to finish off the Jewish race. We know that the best shield against genocide is a state of your own. I want to see a memorial that explores anti-Semitism, just focusing on the dead will do little to change the views of the youths who abuse us and the relentless anti-Israel bias in the media. This is a missed opportunity. We should be carrying out the education.
Thank you very much, Baroness Deach. So our next speaker is Arthur Kremenstein. I've got a message from a Max Klein saying he'd like to speak, but his internet connection has dropped. If we can find Max Klein, I would like to call him. But what we're having, Arnold Kremenstein now, then Paul Hart, then Johnny Taylor, then Max Klein, if we can find him, and then Jonathan Seresh. Okay, Arnold.
Hello, good afternoon. As been said, the Imperial War Museum has opened a new wing, which is dedicated to the Holocaust. And for that reason, I don't think a memorial is needed. If a memorial was needed, I think this site is inappropriate. It's too big, and it's going to destroy a heritage site. I'm originally from France, and my father was deported to Auschwitz in 1942. So I know the Paris Memorial to the Shoah. It's accessed by a narrow one-way street, and there is security in order to get inside the building, and it's nowhere near any prominent place. It's not near the Élysée Palace. It's not on Champs-Élysées, near the Louvre, nowhere. And yet it functions quite very well, and it doesn't suffer from not being having a high profile. There seems to be a fixation for this if this memorial goes ahead, which I hope it does not. Absolutely, a fixation is by Parliament. But then this bit, as I say, the French one is nowhere near their Parliament, and I feel that it could be anywhere. I think that's all. The only other thing I would say was in 2019, on the Holocaust Memorial Day at Queen Elizabeth II Hall, somebody who's heavily involved, I don't want to give their name, I'll try not even give their gender, but before the ceremonies were held, that person popped up and gave an update on the on this project, and he finished with a comment, I can say almost verbatim, saying, "I look forward to the day when a tourist comes up to me and asks for directions to a Parliament, and I'll be able to say, you see that building there? That is the Holocaust Memorial." Which to me gives some idea of what this project represents. It seems to be a vanity project, and it should not go ahead at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnold. Our next speaker is Paul Hart, then Johnny Taylor, then Max Klein, then Jonathan Seresh, and after Jonathan, Vicky Harris. Paul.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have already debated this on the Board of Deputies, and my concern was that after it gets erected, it would be quickly filled up with anti-Semitic graffiti and Palestinian graffiti. We do have excellent Holocaust memorials, including the Imperial War Museum and even the small section in the Jewish Museum in this country. I think the money would be better spent in fighting modern anti-Semitism by helping the CST and the CAA in its fight against anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Johnny Taylor, then Max Klein, then Jonathan Seresh. Johnny. I don't think we can hear you, Johnny. You're on mute still, Johnny. Could you come off mute?
Yes, I was cut off. Thank you very much, everybody. Good afternoon. A National Central Holocaust Memorial is without doubt a requirement in modern 21st century United Kingdom. The present location, deep into a remote corner of Hyde Park, is hardly central and not sufficiently visited. So rather like the cenotaph or a National War Arboretum, a new, more prominent location is sorely needed. A decision has been made for Westminster, and this is excellent. This must be allowed to proceed. However, the present proposal is not just for a shrine, but for a museum, learning centre, including a memorial to other genocides. This will rapidly become a massive coach parking nightmare and an unpopular obstruction to day-to-day life in the heart of Westminster. A high-profile memorial is not desirable. A museum, learning centre and memorial to other genocides can be located in other centre sites, ideally, as has been mentioned many times, next to or inside the Imperial War Museum itself, where much material for exhibition and learning is already located. To me, the argument that it will become a national target for anti-Semitic protest and hate speech and physical attacks and verbal abuse does not hold water. This already exists wherever the centre would be located. Therefore, I'll be brief, I'm in favour of a sufficiently more modest memorial in the centre in Victoria Park Gardens, but not such a high-profile project as has been proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. The next speaker is Max Klein, then Jonathan Serish, then Vicky Harris, then Hal Mogridge, and then Jonathan W. I'm not sure who Jonathan W. Certainly will doubtless tell us when the time comes. Max, over to you.
Yeah. Good afternoon. The UK's Holocaust experience was different from that of any occupied nation by virtue of the fact that it was never under Nazi control. So we need to ask ourselves whether treating the Holocaust as something to do with wartime is the most effective way of learning its lessons, or is even relevant to us in the UK. After all, it's perfectly reasonable for people to want to distance themselves from the experience of war. At the very least, we recognise that in some way things are different in wartime from the way things are now. I believe that the lessons of the memorial can teach us most effectively are lessons relating to peacetime. The memorial can and it ought to be teaching us about the Holocaust as a peacetime phenomenon. Every aspect of the final solution can be traced back not only to indoctrination and encouragement to a culture of violence dating back to before the Nazis came to power, but also to choices made by individuals, choices they made which gave them immediate social, career and commercial gains. In Germany, countless individuals brought into the anti-Semitic narrative, derived economic and social advantages from doing so, and took local initiatives even ahead of the Nazi government's anti-Jewish legislation. The choices they made teach us something that is relevant today and for each coming generation, and I've written a paper on this. Finally, I believe there is nowhere in the UK more suitable for memorial than the intended location next to Parliament. The Nazis came to power because they were able to subvert a weak democracy, a democracy fractured by the tactics of extremist political parties, not just the Nazis themselves, and by organizations each focused on their own particular view of social justice, expressing contempt for the Constitution and perfectly prepared to engage in direct action on the streets. Again, lessons to be learned for today about cherishing our Constitution and keeping our first past the post-democracy strong. Thank you.
Max, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Jonathan Serish. Jonathan, can you unmute?
Just trying to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I hope I pronounced your surname right.
No, but it'll do. Ruth, Vicky and others know it. Firstly, I support the last two speakers in agreeing that the site is an excellent site, and I can give my reasons, but I also agree that what is proposed is too large, and it is unnecessary for it to be so large, because actually, in my experience, I used to run a local scout troop and do a few other things, still do a few things locally. It is amazing how many people whom I'm trying to lead forward simply cannot bring themselves to believe that in a modern state, an enabling law, such as Hitler passed, and a state-sponsored persecution of its own citizens can actually take place. And they're not aware, especially people who are not Jewish, are often not aware that actually there was state-sponsored murder. And I think this gives us an answer to the problem that's been raised perfectly legitimately by both sides to this debate. The answer is the location is perfect because the casual tourist to Parliament may just go off track into the education centre. And secondly, if we focus on did the Holocaust actually happen, which so many people, believe it or not, don't understand happened as a state-sponsored murder, we don't need a vast centre like the Imperial War Museum galleries in the location at Westminster Gardens. All we need is something as small as the excellent Camden Jewish Museum Photographic Evidence Centre with a few videos that I went to see, and one of my daughters went to see independently, and we thought was excellent. So what I'm saying is that the location, just like Johnny Taylor and Max Klein have just said, is excellent. It is a Kiddush Hashem that Parliament, and David Cameron in particular, felt that it should be there. It's a Kiddush Hashem that our king believes in it, and indeed has sponsored portraits of some survivors. And I think that in that location, it is a marvelous place to have underground. And this is a place where I sat with my wife just 2 years ago, just to see if it was going to ruin the place. I agree it doesn't need 23 brass fins, but that can be amended. Even with the 23 brass fins, it hardly loses the grass space. And as far as flood defences are concerned and the rest, if modern engineering can't deal with that, it's a sorry thing. I'll end up there. I believe in the goodwill of everybody, many of them old friends who, for the reasons given, oppose this. But I also believe that there are sound arguments the other way, and that we should grasp the opportunity, which is unlikely to be repeated, to have something not in the middle of Hyde Park.
Okay, sorry, 3 minutes ran out there, Jonathan, but thank you very much. Before I ask Vicky Harris to speak, I can only see 9 or 10 further people putting in to speak. So please can I ask others, be brave, please give us your views, even if it's only for a few seconds, but the more people speaking, I think the better. It makes this event much more comprehensive. So please, if you haven't put in to speak, please consider doing so. Thank you. Vicky.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm following from one of my longest standing friends, Jonathan Sears, although I'm afraid I don't entirely agree with him. I welcome this debate. As a deputy for my synagogue on the Board of Deputies of British Jews, I must say that I don't agree with my colleague, Deputy Paul Hart. We have not had a debate at the Board of Deputies. I personally, together with some other deputies, sought a debate, proposed a motion, but was denied the opportunity, have been denied the opportunity, and I do not therefore understand on what basis the president of the board has said that the board strongly supports this. What is the key issue facing British Jewry today? Very simply, it's anti-Semitism. We've seen horrendous rises in the occurrence of anti-Semitism. And what should we be doing as a Jewish community now? We need to teach people today about the Jews today. That is what Holocaust education should be about now. Yes, of course, we've got to consecrate the memory of those 6 million who passed away. But the key thing is educating today's people, young people in the schools, in the universities and elsewhere. So what would the project in Victoria Gardens, forgive me, achieve that educational objective? And would it result in reducing anti-Semitism here in the UK? I have my doubts. It's not the aim of those who plan the memorial to combat anti-Semitism. I doubt the so-called Learning Centre will teach about anti-Semitism. Colleagues have already said it will include other genocides, as though somehow they compared favourably or properly with the Holocaust. It's likely to be a security threat, vandalism. It ruins the park as planned. A good design, really? 23 fins? How does that evoke memories of the Holocaust? And what about the costs? Not just the capital cost. What about all the running costs? Who's going to pay for those? Furthermore, there's been no research on the efficacy of Holocaust Memorial in reducing anti-Semitism? I respect Baroness Deach, who is herself a parliamentarian and who understands other parliamentarians. She's got it right. I'm firmly against this memorial.
Vicky, thank you very much. The next speaker will be Hal Mogris. Before I call Hal, can I just ask two other people, John, Spain and Frankie? It'd be nice if you could turn on your cameras because when you speak to people who actually see you. So John, thank you so much. And Frankie, if you could also turn on your camera, I will be calling you later. So Hal, and then Jonathan W, then Ruth Hart. Hal.
If the UK Heritage Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre were constructed on Victoria Tower Gardens as designed, the Public Inquiry Inspector identified in his report, and I quote, "The perception of the park would change, with its role as the setting of the memorial inevitably becoming a more substantial element of its identity. Local residents would be discouraged from using the park for informal recreation." Now, these local residents include many less well off who have no private outdoor space. It is for them and many others that the 1900 Act ruled that they laid out and maintained for use as a garden open to the public. And there are other vital uses as well in this park. Politicians explain their ideas on TV, events like dog shows, large gatherings of the public in preparation for democratic demonstrations, and just recently, a civic assembly related to our Constitution, when the queues of people who came to see the coffin of our late Queen prepared themselves physically and spiritually in the gardens after queuing for 15 hours. And there's no other place for suitable things like this. Therefore, though I think it is true that a small memorial would be possible in Victoria Tower Gardens, and it could be enriched by a small memorial garden by the river near the Houses of Parliament as well, I think this is a totally inappropriate place for the large-scale memorial which is being proposed, and that it shouldn't be considered at all. Thank you.
Hal, thank you very much. Jonathan W, if you could tell us your name would be nice. Thank you. Could you unmute?
Hi, I'm Jonathan Weisbart. Thank you very much for hosting this debate. I'd like to thank all your speakers beforehand, but in particular, Mr. Alderman, Baroness Deach, and just now Vicky Harris. And a lot of what I want to talk about has actually been raised by many of your speakers. Despite being, or perhaps even because I am the son of Holocaust survivors myself, with my father a refugee from pre-war Germany and my mother a survivor from Hungary, I would like to register my objection to this memorial for two main reasons. The first main objection is that we have enough effective memorials in this country already. We've spoken about the Imperial War Museum, which I visited just a couple of months ago, which is excellent. And if we need to speak about more education and offer it, that's the place, that's the obvious place we could offer to, and it's already in a very well located place, and in the context, I would say it works very well. Generally, as far as memorials and museums go, I think that it is particularly relevant in countries where the Holocaust itself happened, like Germany, Poland, etc., and in Israel too, where it's part of the national story. But the Holocaust didn't happen here. And there are lots of things Britain can be proud of, the Kinder transport, etc. But on the negative side, you know, we closed the borders to Palestine. There was Nazi occupation in the Channel Islands. Britain had a huge indirect role in condemning Jews to their fate, and we've got to teach our population at large about that. But my second and principal objection to this memorial is that we have to educate people about Jews and anti-Semitism in the UK today. I don't think anybody disputes the moral priority of memorializing the Holocaust and educating people about that. But one can't help feeling that this memorial and its proposed location is purely a tick box exercise to memorialize, how else can I say, dead Jews? Where's the resolve of our leaders to root out the cause of anti-Semitism today? David Baddiel recently wrote his book, Jews Don't Count. The BBC didn't positively respond to criticism of its unbalanced reporting on an attack on a bus of Jewish kids in the West End recently. And really, don't get me started on the BBC's reporting of Israel today. So I say we should spend £100 million earmarked for this memorial to educate people about anti-Semitism and what makes Jews in Britain feel uncomfortable today, whether it's the rise of anti-Semitism on campuses or the banning on Shechita in many European countries, or the anti-Israel rhetoric that's in the media. In conclusion, it's all too easy and comfortable for us to build yet another memorial. It's much harder to educate the living about the prejudice that we as Jews face today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Ruth Hart, and then I'll be calling John Spain, Cheryl Lee, and Carl Cohen. Ruth.
Good afternoon. I'm inclined to agree with Paul and Jeffrey and Jonathan that £100 million, it might be better spent either defending us from anti-Semitism now or helping the remaining survivors. And I'm wondering if as Jews, sometimes we subconsciously think we could resurrect the dead by building a memorial, and do today's so-called anti-Zionists or anti-racists feel that they can deny the connection between the Jews who emerged in the Holocaust and all the Jews who lived before or since, so that they can, out of one corner of their mouths, condemn anti-Semitism, and out of the other corner, condemn the state of Israel. Things that they... Sorry about the interruption.
I'm not sure.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you.
I'm wondering if that's what enables a hypocrisy, like they see those as being 2 or 3 disparate groups of Jews who have nothing to do with each other.
Sorry, someone is not on mute. Can we mute everyone and then I'll unmute Ruth? Because we've got a bit of a problem here. Okay, Ruth, carry on. And can we add 30 seconds to Ruth's time, please?
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering whether gestures like this enable the anti-racists to deny the connection between those who emerged from the Holocaust and the history of the Jews before, from the beginning of the land of Israel until the Holocaust, and all of those of us who've lived from the beginning of the state of Israel until now.
Okay, Ruth, you can carry on.
Yeah, okay. Which is why, even though I did have my doubts, I'm gradually coming around to being opposed. But I mean, I would be slightly in favour of a smaller memorial, or on the same spot.
Thank you, Ruth. My apologies to you for the slight screw up with the muting of people. So John Spain, then Cheryl Lee, then Carol Cohen, then Richard Galber, then Michael Rowe. John.
You are there, the image.
Sorry, John Spain.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
I have
you can.
First of all, thank you for organising this debate. It's really welcome, because there hasn't been really much serious debate, and I will try not to repeat what other people have already said. Just 3 things. First of all, I know Jonathan Sears has visited that park because he said so 2 years ago with his wife. I've been there quite a few times. I even took my granddaughter there a couple of months ago, and she absolutely loved it, especially that wonderful playground. This is such a valuable resource for people in that area and visitors. Nothing should be allowed to get in its way. It really is superb. Secondly, I think it was Vicky earlier, apologies if I got the name wrong, from Hampstead Garden suburb, who mentioned the importance of education, especially of the young people. Well, I agree with education, but it's not just the young people. It's also older people, right up
to those, I'm in my 70s, and beyond, because they will also be educating younger people. This is much wider than trying to get to younger people who aren't really that interested, some of them. Third, a few people have said, well, maybe something smaller than the same spot would be okay. Well, not really, because this has turned into a vanity exercise and it's all or nothing for them. MPs, should we call them community politicians, who are trying to push this? And it needs to be opposed because, and this is my main thing, if it were to go ahead, people around, all around, will think, why is it that the Jews, who are obviously in control of everything, manage to get such a plum spot, that fewer anti-Semitism? It really is the wrong place for anything. I think it was Baroness Deitch who pointed out in a letter to the JC a few months ago that the original criteria that had been created for this had none of them been fulfilled. This is a flawed project. It should be stopped. How that can be done, I don't know, but showing that there is real opposition might help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Cheryl, you're next, and after Cheryl will be Carl, then Richard Galba, Michael Rowe, and then Frankie. Cheryl.
I dipped in and out of the conference, which, as you know, went on for a very long time. And certain things have been said today, and I would just like to say what I heard when the discussion was going on. Number one, the authorities had not put forward any feelings about terrorism or it being unsafe. Number two, the architect was quizzed considerably about the number of fins that represented different countries. But as he said, it was very difficult to be precise because the borders changed during and before and after the war. The third thing that really came across loud and clear is that the reason why many people wanted it to be on the site that's proposed is that it is a statement to the world that the British government recognise the appalling things that were done, and they are in complete solidarity with the members, particularly the Jewish people of this country, that they are working and on their side. And it's sentiments that were propounded by, I think it was Eric Pickles and John Mann, that they want parliamentarians to look out of the window and see the memorial and what freedom in their eyes actually stands for. I think we have to be very careful about, there's a lot of rhetoric flying around. But from what I've been hearing today, I'm afraid some of it is not what I heard in the days and weeks that I attended on Zoom, a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the conversation. For me, I don't think we should be put away in a little corner. People have said about the British Museum, okay, some people know about it, some people don't. But tourists who come along, they come to Parliament, they see the memorial, and it makes a huge statement of how we are viewed in this country. Thank you.
Thanks. Before I go on to the next speaker, Frankie, your hand isn't up anymore. Do you still wish to speak? Could you unmute so I know? Sorry. Well, let me know. Put your hand up again if you do wish to speak.
Oh, how to do it?
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm not calling you right now. I'm going to call you. As your hand has been up and has gone down, but
Right.
you had put in to speak. So I just want to check you still wish to speak. Oh, I'll mute again. Never mind. Let me know later. So, Carl Cohen, your turn. Could you unmute, Carl? There you are.
Unmute. Hello and shalom to everybody. It's most welcome and a very dignified conversation, debate. I hate putting my status on. I'm a Holocaust survivor. It doesn't give me any extra merit or whatever right to say something, but just for public information. Escape the horrors of the Holocaust in Transnistria and Romania, Ukraine, and so on, but that's beside the point. I put my cards on the table immediately. I'm deadly against erecting that monument next to Parliament. If by 2022 people still need a reminder about the Holocaust, there's nothing, I think we are hopeless. There is something very important. The constant reminder by people who are using it as a whitewashing method for Britain's horrible track record during the Second World War regarding Jews fleeing for their lives. And maybe it's some kind of attempt to say we feel for you, whatever. I think it does the wrong thing. We will see armies of politicians coming, putting a black kippah, never again, and a few minutes later going to the parliament, having a nice lunch and voting against Israel non-stop. Moreover, I think overall, the constant obsession, I call it obsession, various people for various reasons, to erect monuments or to keep the Holocaust constantly as a fresh topic will make no new converts, will not explain to anybody, but it will have a debilitating effect on the Jewish psyche. It will be a reminder to all Jewish generations, young and not so young, that we were led to the chamber, the gas chambers as hopeless victims, instead of concentrating on our fantastic survival, defying all odds, defying a rotten world that denied us the right to live, and we have a fantastic Jewish state. No to the memorial next to Parliament.
Thank you very much, Carl. We have just 3 more speakers. So at this point, once again, I'm going to call for anyone who hasn't spoken who'd like to say, even if it's only a few sentences, you're most welcome. And I will also say at this point that people who have already spoken and want to make extra points can, if they wish, put in again. Because once everyone's had one crack, then it's only fair that I can invite people to have a second crack. Good. So the speakers I have now, Richard Galbert, then Michael Rowe, then Frankie, and then Eva Clark. Richard.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks for this. It's actually a very interesting debate and it really needs to happen. I personally am very much against it because I think it's going to turn out to be a magnet for anti-Semites and anti-Israelis just because of its proximity to Parliament and its centralized location. I also think that a museum like this would actually, in a short period of time, stop being only the Holocaust Museum and because of pressure become a museum for all genocides. That I think is a really big problem. A lot of people have mentioned the Imperial War Museum. I haven't been to the new exhibition, but I used to go to the old one and I was amazed. It was quite incredible to watch people walk in fairly lighthearted and joking in some instances and then becoming very quiet as they went through it and coming out almost in a state of shock. I haven't seen that in many museums. I think it was an incredible show at its position. Also, because Britain didn't have any Holocaust within the country, I don't think we need a separate Holocaust museum. I think being within the Imperial War Museum as part of the whole war is quite important. Thank you very much.
Richard, thank you very much. Our next speakers then Michael Rowe, then Frankie, then Ava Clark. And anyone who hasn't spoken before, please put in. And I've got Jeff Rowland and Irene Lancaster who would like to speak for a second time. Michael.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm very much also enjoying the debate and think it's very worthwhile. So thank you to the NJA for facilitating this. I'd just like to make a series of points without any specific direction as to for or against, but following what I've heard for the last hour or so, just to bring a few ideas together. The first is, I do think there is a value to having a Holocaust educational and memorial centre in the heart of our country and democracy. But I do agree that the size of the proposed structure is too imposing and too great for a number of reasons. And these have been touched on before, but I think it's worth remembering that this will become a target for those who wish to do the community and the cause down. I mean, we can talk about sort of police protection and having this building guarded, but we have to look at the Thatcher statue that was erected not very long ago, with all the CCTV and all the security that's had around it. We're constantly seeing in the news the amount of attacks and the amount of egg throwing and criticism that's taking place of that one particular statue. So how much more so for such a big structure and next to the heart of our democracy? So I do think there's value in reducing the size of the proposed building. But, and I see for a number of reasons why it's important to divert money away from just building a memorial centre and moving that into education. But I do worry, just like the previous speaker, that however valuable it is to educate people about all the different atrocities which have taken place, which come under the heading of the Holocaust Educational Trust, I think it's important to remember that we as a community need to be focusing on the Holocaust and education surrounding that, which is the only way to prevent anti-Semitism. So I think it's wonderful that the government's focused on spending money on reducing anti-Semitism and educating about the Holocaust. But as a community, we need to make sure that if money is moved away from this particular building to move it into education, it's done so in a way that specifically reminds people of what the Jewish community went through and is still going through, rather than making it so broad that anyone or any community that's ever faced an atrocity comes under that bracket. So I think that's one thing to remember. Finally, I just make the point that the value we have as a community in this project should be remembered, but also the value that government place on education of the Holocaust should be remembered. And we should be, as a community, grateful that this is even being talked about. I'm sure there's so many issues within government and within particular faith communities that people want to make the headlines about, and for whatever reason, it's not possible to. So whether this goes ahead or it doesn't, it's worth remembering that we should be grateful to government for spending the time and money on educating people about the Holocaust. Thank you.
Michael, thank you very much. The order in which I'm going to call speakers now, Frankie will be next, then Ava Clark. Ava, it'd be nice if you could turn your camera on so we can see you. Then I'm going to call Stuart Jacobs, because I don't think he's spoken before. And then after that, the people who have spoken for the second time, it'll be Jeff Rowland, Irene Lancaster, Baroness Ruth Deach, and John Spain, and Jonathan Sears. Frankie.
Hello, I'm Frankie Goodman, and I thank you for giving us the opportunity to debate this issue. I'm firmly against it, but previous speakers have given my views possibly more cogently than I can. I would like to say that it distresses me that there have been these sweeping statements that the Jewish community is in favour of this project when it's patently not true, and it's awful that the Board of Deputies, as I've heard, hasn't allowed a debate on it. I used to be a deputy for Maidenhead. The court have ruled such a project unlawful, and if this is to be overruled, I can only anticipate there'll be a great deal more anti-Semitism. I'm presently reading the very well-researched and well-written book by Dara Horn, People Love Dead Jews, and I think this is a vanity decision where everyone wants to get on the bandwagon and say, oh yes, well, and she cites what happened at the Frank Museum when a Jewish volunteer was prohibited from being there for 3 months because he wanted to wear his yarmulke. And so I think if it goes ahead anyway, it will be hijacked in the way other matters have been hijacked. And I think money should be spent on the universities and the anti-Zionist dialogue, not just the BBC, but the universities. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak, and I really applaud what previous persons have said. Thank you.
And thank you, Frankie, for your contribution. So it's Ava Clark, then Stuart Jacobs, and then assuming there are no new people who haven't spoken before, then it will be Jeff Rowland. So Ava.
Hello. Can I first of all say, I pronounce my name in this country Eva. That's
I'm so sorry.
No, that's all right. Lots of people get me. I'm originally from Czech Republic, and I am actually a Holocaust survivor, but only just because I was born in a camp. Originally, when this first project was mentioned, I was all for it, but that was before I had any conception of the size of it or the cost of it. I'm more and more inclined to think it would be a good idea if there were a small memorial in the gardens, you know, more in proportion with the other memorials that are already there. But I think certainly that the majority of the money should be spent on education, on, you know, as lots of people have already said, all young people and older people, somebody else said, education is the most vital way we can use such a vast sum of money. I almost feel as though it's almost immoral, the amount of money that is being talked about for this memorial. And I think basically that's all I wanted to say. And also I want to say the Imperial War Museum exhibition is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you very, very much. Stuart Jacobs.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Stuart Jacobs. I've been listening to this debate, and it comes down to a number of headings, not necessarily in this order: cost, location, anti-Semitism, terrorism, and the IWM exhibition. Well, let's take anti-Semitism first. I don't know why we as Jews blame ourselves for anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is caused by anti-Semitic people. If we really thought we were responsible for anti-Semitism, then what we should do is shut down all our synagogues in this country and shut down all our Jewish organizations, including this one. And by the way, I certainly do not support that idea. So let me just confirm, anti-Semitism is caused by anti-Semitic people. Now, as to the cost is large. I don't think that such a lot of money should be spent. I do, however, think the location for this memorial should be at the Jewish Museum. That is a natural place where it should be. It should also include the history of anti-Semitism and what could be done to defeat it. Last but not least, there is a exhibition in the IWM which has taken many years to put together. We don't know how long that's going to be there. But an exhibition of the Jewish Museum would be permanent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart, very much. And so now, in the absence of seeing anybody who hasn't spoken before, sorry, Heath Sloan. Yes, Heath. My apologies, Heath.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everybody. Thank you for organizing this debate. And it's great to hear so many eloquent speakers from both sides to mount their arguments. A few things came up that I just wanted to give my 2 cents on. The first is this question of security. I think that presuming that any Jewish site would become a target of anti-Semitism holds true for any Jewish institution, whether it's a small business, an individual's home, all the way to the Israeli embassy itself. So I don't think that we should be fearful of establishing this site for fear of vandalism. I think also with the security funding tag and the proximity to Westminster, I think our security concerns would be well and truly met. So I don't think that carries water. The second is the location. Having read some of the information about the proposal, it would be a modest sacrifice of about 1/4 of the green space of the park. Most of the structure is subterranean, so it's not going to be some ghastly skyscraper sticking out next to Westminster. So I think that that's perhaps being a bit overblown. The third is the question of the size of the memorial. I'm not really sure why, if there's political will and there's quite a large allotment of money for this, why we would want to curtail the size and scope. I think we should be going for the largest and most impactful structure and site possible, especially if there's the will and funding for it. On the fourth point of whether or not it's a vanity project, to this I'd say that even if it is at its core, or that happens to be some element of it, I think we have to ask ourselves, is it better to have that or not to have that, notwithstanding that vanity aspect? I think that the benefit of having a permanent reminder in such a prominent location and serving as a tool for education outweighs the sacrifice to the public space there. And then on the last point, I think that so many speakers today have noted the rise of anti-Semitism. It's very concerning and it's only trending in a negative direction. And I think that if we pass up this incredible opportunity, when more attacks happen, when more incidents happen, we need to ask ourselves, what steps didn't we take to try to mitigate anti-Semitism and its rise in the UK? Here is a golden opportunity to take concrete steps to curb that. And so I think that perhaps now is a teachable moment where we can save ourselves some browbeating and head scratching in the future and take concrete steps now. Thank you.
Thank you, Heath. I don't see anybody who hasn't spoken before coming forward. So now, Jeff Rowland. You're on mute, Jeff. Great.
Thank you. Yes, somebody posed the question earlier, how can the project be stopped? It's my understanding, but I may be wrong, and I'd be happy to be corrected if this is wrong, that it would now lead, for it to proceed, it would now need legislation to overturn the legislation from 1910, which prevents building in the park. I'm sure Baroness Deitch will know more about this. What worries me is that MPs would be very loath to vote against a project like this for fear of being accused of anti-Semitism. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Irene Lancaster.
Thanks. I'm very sorry I overdid my welcome last time, and I'll try and be brief. All I was going to say about the present king, it is not slanderous, is that he spent the whole time at Yad Vashem talking about how marvellous Anita Lasker-Wallfisch is. I'm bringing this up because she is a very prominent Holocaust survivor who started the English Chamber Orchestra, and her son is a great cellist as well. And they are totally against this project, but it was brought up at the planning inquiry, all of which I was asked to attend, by Rabbi Mervis, that all the prominent Holocaust survivors are in favour, and that's what I wanted to say. I also wanted to say that I have been honoured to meet Elie Wiesel in the course of my teaching the subject, and I was the first person in this country to teach it. And this was at the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991. And he told me then, over an hour, that he had made a terrible mistake backing this sort of thing in America, because research had shown even then that it was being used against the Jewish community, as Ruth Deitch and others have pointed out. I've also done research in Lithuania and Germany, and I know the languages, and it is quite obvious that it is used in those sorts of countries to make people feel good about themselves and not for the Jewish community. The more recent one in Berlin was boycotted by the Jewish community and has been used recently by neo-Nazis as places to desecrate Judaism. Some of the very good points that have been brought up during this hour or so by others were what we were told on the jury. If you're on a jury for someone who has stolen a bottle of milk because he's thirsty, and you think you can put things right with a probation order, and it ends up being rape and murder of a holy green space that is very precious to loads of people, that is, I hate to say, what the Nazis did to my family in Poland. All of my father's family except him were wiped out, and like Ruth, I cannot bear to see this, especially as I was on the jury, to see this go ahead when we were told the very opposite at all times than what has actually turned out to be the case. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Irene. So I see three further speakers, Baroness Ruth Deitch, then John Spain, then Jonathan Sears. Baroness Deitch.
Many people have spoken about the importance of Westminster because it's a central location for presentation of this. But if Jews are going to be presented centrally, I don't want just those dreadful pictures of skeletons and people in striped pajamas and so on. I want Britain to see the totality of Jewish history and culture and what we're doing now. The casual visitor will only see these pictures, these terrible pictures of skeletons. And I think that feeds in to the kind of Nazi slogans that we find being used on campus and the very narrow result of Holocaust education in school, which doesn't seem to have worked. There'll be 4 rooms underground, one on righteous Gentiles, one a mock-up of the Commons Chamber, one on other genocides, Rwanda and so on, and only one on the Jews. So we will only have a quarter of it. It'll all be wrapped up in this general Western civilization, British values is the answer. Jonathan Sachs said, Holocaust education should be in context. We want a museum that presents Jewish history all the way up to Israel. The place you'll see it, ironically, is in Warsaw, the Poland Museum there, which is wonderful. Now, it is political. Our tragedy has been hijacked. If you look at the members of the foundation, there are no Holocaust scholars on that foundation. It has people like Baroness Harding of Test and Trace and some financiers, and you do wonder how it was put together. And also, anti-Semitism is hurled even at me for objecting to this. Be careful about that. They'll say that you're anti-Semitic if you oppose it. And that's why I think it's important that the NJA sends out a message, as I hope it will, that it is not anti-Semitic. On the contrary, we have a much bigger and better story to tell in an alternative location. And finally, please email me if you want the full analysis. I have spent years digging into this. So if you want to email me, I put my address in the chat box, please do, and I'll send you something. Thanks.
Thank you, Baroness Deach. The last 2 speakers, John Spain and Jonathan Sears. Oh no, we've got 2 more after that, Naomi Wayne and Keith Rowe. John Spain, would you like to go now?
Thank you for a second chance. I appreciate it. Rather than going over ground, new ground, can I just pick up on a couple of points made by other speakers? One was about having the Holocaust Memorial basically in the Imperial War Museum. Imperial War Museum is about wars. The Holocaust, it really is important enough to be on its own. It is something that would have continued, sadly, even if the Germans had not invaded Poland and the Brits would not have gone to war. So it's not really part of war, it's quite independent. Secondly, somebody in the chat pointed out that having something in central London doesn't do very much for people in other parts of England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. And that's true. Something should be done about that. Third, a few speakers ago, somebody commented that anti-Semitism is the fault of anti-Semites, not of the Jews. With respect, I disagree a bit. When a Jew offends non-Jews, sometimes that is what sets something off, and it's picked up badly because it is a Jew who did something or didn't do something that was expected of them. Telling a non-Jew, for example, that paying on time is actually a halacha goes down very well, and showing the halacha, whichever one you keep, is something that colours people's lives for good against other people, is something that should not be dismissed. We are partly to blame, I'm afraid, for anti-Semitism, but not what we actually see all around us. That is amazing, but just stopping it starting, I think it's quite important. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Jonathan Sears, and hopefully this time I've got your name right. You're on mute, Jonathan.
I know. Am I still on mute?
No, we can hear you. I just said, I hope we've got your name right this time.
You did. In fact, if you go back to Spain, it's Ceres, a living being. And if you go to Hungary, if you believe it's Hungarian, it's a man who likes beer. So take your pick. There you go. I just made a few notes. I'd like to stress again a fundamental fact that several of the speakers have said, namely the Holocaust didn't occur in the UK. And I go back to my point about not just the Scouts and other well-meaning youngsters who are so well-meaning they can't bring themselves to believe that actually there's state-sponsored murder on a genocide scale. So the great thing about the location is to make that fact known to the woke and skeptical so close in central London that they can't avoid it. I don't see the woke, the skeptical, or the youngsters going to a place called the Imperial War Museum, although I agree it's a brilliant place. Again, my wife and I have been to the National Holocaust Museum in Nottingham. Those two marvelous Christian brothers who set it up. Great place, but unless you make a point of going there, and sad to say, your woke, skeptical and youngsters won't, you wouldn't know how good it was. Eva made the point, an excellent one, smaller size, great location. Heath Sloane, if we pass up the opportunity, and that's why I mentioned in my first offering, David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, we're not likely to get this offering again. We shouldn't pass it up. As far as the existing memorials, the Burghers of Calais and the Buxton anti-slavery one, they don't need to be overshadowed at all. And the picture on Google and some pictures I took show that there's no need to be concerned on that. That in the distance, Parliament rises far, far above the horizon of those memorials or the intended one. Irene Lancaster mentions Elie Wiesel, a cousin of mine in Paris, who sadly, having rescued her mother from Drancy in 1942, lost her dad and uncle because she was a day late at Drancy. She doesn't look Jewish, and she got there with a fake identification paper. She introduced me to Elie Wiesel, a marvelous man. And Irene said that he said that similar projects didn't have the right effect in California. We're not California. This is an opportunity that, as Heath said, we shouldn't pass up. Ruth Deach, whom I love and admire and learn so much from, 4 intended rooms. Let's try and improve that down to 2 rooms, focusing on what I hope you and I would agree would be the right approach. John Spain, absolutely right, needs a Holocaust memorial on its own and not part of the Imperial War Museum, although supplemented by it. And the lady who mentioned Camden Museum, the Jewish Museum, no, it's a gentleman, Jewish Museum is far too small for the visitors that this will get, and it's in the wrong place.
Thank you. Okay, Naomi, oh, sorry, Naomi, yes, Naomi, you're next. And then Keith, and then Richard. So now put his hand up. Naomi.
Thank you very much for calling me. This is a very strange experience for me because I am totally opposed to the memorial in the gardens. But when I listen to people speaking on both sides, I take bits from each of them which I agree with, and quite a lot that I totally disagree with, because I am not one of those people who believes that there is a massive existential threat to Jews. I love living in this country. I think we are mostly safe. That does not mean that I think we shouldn't take anti-Semitism seriously, but I think it is being weaponized and used for political purposes. I suspect I'm in a minority of 1 in speaking like this, but I did want that voice to be heard, and also to say a couple of things about why I'm opposed to this memorial. The most moving memorial I ever saw was the American memorial for the soldiers who died in the Vietnam War. And I remember walking along that memorial, which is simply black marble with all their names inscribed. And I cried. It was incredibly moving. It was an incredibly dignified and very simple memorial. And the point about it is, I opposed the Vietnam War. I thought what America did was wrong, but I wept for their soldiers. And many of whom just did not want to be there. And I would like us to be, as many Jewish communities, we're not just one Jewish community, what I would like us to be is a community of generosity that recognises that there are a whole range of appalling discriminations, of which anti-Semitism is one. And that used to be part of Jewish generosity. I'm not sure that I see that now. I'm confused. Is this memorial about the Holocaust? In which case it should definitely recognise other communities that were destroyed. For example, the Roma, who proportionately, and people may find this hard to believe, who proportionately lost even more people, even a higher percentage of their communities than Jews did. They're a smaller number because there's a smaller number of Roma. We completely forget the Roma. We continue to discriminate against them. Is this a Holocaust memorial, or is this a memorial about anti-Semitism? Because I don't think they're the same thing, and it's never been made clear. And one of the reasons it's not clear is because there has been no consultation, as far as I'm aware. I didn't know this was happening till I saw an exhibition of a set of absolutely ghastly architectural proposals in the Tate Museum. I'd like us to have a proper consultation, all of us.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Keith, welcome.
Thank you, Gary. And I wanted to just start by saying a particular thank you to you, Gary, and to the NJA for organising this debate, because as the previous speaker just said, there has been no real debate in the Jewish community about whether we want this, and if we do want this, how do we actually want it and where do we actually want it? It's been foisted on us. There's been some discussion probably among parliamentarians, and that's what they can consider to be some form of inclusion. And quite noticeably, from what we've heard this afternoon, there is a lot of opposition to all the ideas that have been put forward within the Jewish community. But of course, the people on this debate this afternoon is a very small sample. Now, I've listened with interest this afternoon to all of the arguments. Very well put, a lot of these arguments are. And on the face of it, I would suggest that everybody taking part this afternoon wants some form of memorialization of all the Jews and others, and I would include the Roma and others that were killed in the Holocaust. We all want that to be well known. We want the education of what happened to be clear. But my problem, and I take on board all of the other things about the where this memorial is going to be and the planning issues and all of these other things, my particular problem is with the education centre, not with having a memorial, with having an education centre where the whole thing is being watered down by the fact that other atrocities not connected to the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust, are being included. And I believe that while these are terrible atrocities that happened in Rwanda and other places, to include them within a Holocaust center will just water down the, it's not a very good expression, but it will water down, because the Holocaust was unique in its state industrial sponsored, the way the whole thing was put forward by the state in the way it was, the Holocaust operated. And I'm so against, now that I've listened to all of these arguments, the way that this memorial will operate. I think now it's down to the NJA to get this debate out there into the wider community. Our next task as an organization must be to make these arguments much more widely known. So I do think that the NJA has done a very valuable service to the community in exposing all that's gone on. Thank you, Gary, and let's hope that we can have a much wider debate on this and perhaps either make some radical changes or turn this whole proposal down and do something else with this vast sum of money instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Richard Galba, it looks like he's going to be the last speaker. Let me just tell you what will happen. Oh, no, we have another one. Helen is going to speak after Richard. After Richard and Helen have spoken, I'm going to speak myself just for a couple of minutes to tell you about what the NJA is doing. And then the last thing we'll do is have our second vote. So if Joel, you could get ready for that after I finish speaking, probably going to be in about 7 or 8 minutes time. So Richard and then Helen. Richard.
Okay. Hi, this is slightly off topic. A number of people in the chat have actually said that the Holocaust would have happened anyway. The Germans would have done it. I'm reading a book at the moment which said that the Germans, as I say, slightly off topic, tried to ship the Jews of Germany outside of Germany, but nobody would accept them. So they had to stay there, and the majority of Jews, and then when the war started, the rest of the Jews couldn't escape, so they were murdered. So possibly the world preventing Jews escaping Germany created the Holocaust, and possibly if the Jews had been able to leave, there wouldn't have been a Holocaust, and we wouldn't be having this conversation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Helen, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the very interesting debate. I'm very grateful that you've held it and that we will be able to hear more from you on this topic. I wanted to pick up on a few points from the debate. Somebody was asking about the Act and the status of where it is. I happen to be behind the scenes dealing with the legislative formula. It is the 1900 Act that meant that the gardens were kept in perpetuity as gardens, and which the government chose to ignore the legality of that despite it being brought to their attention, and which is why this case was brought at the High Court. The government is now considering repealing that act, which would then enable this to go forward. But what a bitter legacy that would be. I wanted to also pick up on a point that Heath Sloan made about how it doesn't matter that it's underground. Unfortunately, it does, because the size of the underground chambers would involve cutting through enormous roots for the trees, which frame the park and is part of the historic design of the park. The trees are over 200 years old, and they would probably suffer, and some might, or almost definitely would die as a result. I did also want to talk about the legacy of the Jewish community. I totally accept that the Holocaust was a traumatic and terrible occasion, but I did also want to echo Carl Cohen's wise words about us not being seen as victims and showing how Jews can thrive in modern society, and that climate change, which is far bigger and a greater global problem for all humanity, is one of the ways of showing that is showing respect for the environment and green space and the park that it resides in. And if there is to be a memorial, it should respect that. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for your contributions. It's been most welcome. I'm just going to speak for a couple of minutes about what the NJA is doing. Before I do, I'll just make one observation. I'm not, as chairman of the meeting, I'm being studiously neutral, but I want to give a plug for the Nottinghamshire Centre that was set up by the two Christian brothers in, I think, the Shelburne Forest area. I've been there twice, once for its launch in the late 1980s. At that time, I was a parliamentary candidate and I was invited as a guest. But the second time, I took my then 11-year-old daughter, and it was very impressive. The exhibit that I remember so clearly was the descent of a young German Jewish girl from a normal life in a middle-class home through to the ghettos, all the way down to a concentration camp. And this sort of gradual descent and how the anti-Semitism grew and grew and grew, and how life changed radically. And that actually stuck with me. So I just want to give a plug for anyone who is in the Nottinghamshire area to visit the centre. I think it's in the Shelburne Forest area. Thank you. Right, now the NJA, we've been going nearly 6 months now. As has been said earlier, we've got 3 primary objectives, which is to fight anti-Semitism, support Israel, and to celebrate Jewish life. What we have done is, because we start from nothing really, and we can't exactly have massive influence on day one, what we have done is organised a whole load of meetings. We've had quite a lot of speaker meetings, and we've also formed some committees, which our advisory board have been chairing, to start to think of campaigns we can work on in the anti-Semitism arena, in supporting Israel, and in celebrating Jewish life. But it's all very new. And we also have a new an NJA youth group, which is being chaired by Michael Rowe, who spoke earlier. And they're going to have their first meeting next week, which will be, I think, probably the idea of a new Jewish youth group that is unquestionably Zionist and unquestionably supportive of our objectives is a good idea. We have got a meeting on the 10th of November in a house in Golders Green, for those of you who are in the London area, where the guest speaker will be Fleur Hassan Nahum. And we have in December 2 events. One, we've got the former Israeli ambassador to the UK, Mark Regev, will be speaking to us via Zoom from Israel. And we also, very grateful to Baroness Beach for this, are hosting a Hanukkah party in the House of Lords on Tuesday, the 20th of December, which is the third night of Hanukkah. And all those of you who are members will be notified. Those of you who are not members, and I appreciate quite a number of you are not members, it's only £30 a year to join, and you can come to all of our meetings. So I do hope you'll consider joining. We're planning to carry on and slowly but surely start gaining impact. One of the ways we gain impact is by having more members. And we're around the 230, 240 mark at the moment. And the target in the first year is about 350. And then after that, hopefully move towards 500. The more members we have, the more influence we have, and the more people will start to take us seriously. So I do hope that those of you who are not members will join. Okay, so it now remains for me to ask Joel, who's behind the scenes been doing fantastic work on all the IT here, for Joel to put up the poll for the second poll. See, I don't know if anyone's changed their minds in one direction or another, but the second poll to come. Are you ready, Joel? Don't know. Yes, here we are. So you can vote now. Another 10 seconds or so. I think we have 86 people still online and 71 votes cast. So I'll take another 10, 15 seconds just to finish off. Anyone who hasn't voted, please vote. Okay. Last chance to vote. Okay, so now we have 8 people in favour, 60 people against, and 4 people who still, 9 in favour, 60 against, and 4 who are still undecided. It's interesting that the undecided total has gone down considerably, which is interesting. Well, thank you all very, very much. I'll just say the only thing now remaining for me to say, apart from to thank you for your coming this afternoon. Do please write to the NJA if you have any thoughts or ideas. I've had ideas for 2 further debates like this. One is whether the Labour Party is now a safe place for Jews. And the other debate I've been suggested to me is whether we should be campaigning for Jerusalem, for the British Embassy in Tel Aviv to move to Jerusalem in Israel. Any other ideas are also gratefully received. So once again, thank you all so very much for coming. And I hope that those of you who are not members will consider joining. Thank you. Good afternoon.